Welcome to Dear Mr. Potter. I'm Alistair Stevens. In tonight's session, we cover chapters 21, 22, and 23, or to put it another way, we cover some questionable politics, we cover some adolescent awkwardness, and then we get to the Yule Ball. We are going to be taking a breath from the Triwizard Tournament, a fairly extended breath, as it turns out, and advancing a lot of our character subplots, as well as dealing with the first sparks of romance between the fourth-year students of Hogwarts. And since we'll be talking about characters, let's frame a part of our discussion this evening by asking an open question about one Ronald Bilious Weasley. I ask this, and I do want to frame this very carefully, I ask this as someone who is a big fan of the power trio at the heart of the Harry Potter series, and who generally loves characters who are emotionally connected advocates for love and for loyalty, and particularly for found family. But here we go. Is Ron Weasley a good character? To put this in perhaps more hyperbolic terms, is Ron Weasley the best of us, or is Ron Weasley the worst? I'm inspired to ask this, in part, thanks to an email from listener Thomas, who writes, quote, "My favorite thing about Dear Mr. Potter is that I'm returning to the series and reading it in an entirely new way. I've discovered and rediscovered lots of things which I love, but this latest read-through, just finished Deathly Hallows again, has me confused. I think that I only love Ron because of the first 3 books in the series. After that, he annoys me with his constant selfishness, complaining, and sulking. Am I crazy?" And the answer, Thomas, is no. I'm not necessarily sure that I can follow you down that path to its inevitable and logical conclusion, but I've been having some problems with Ron myself in this book, and like you, I suspect, they are problems which had simply never occurred to me before. I think we all of us who have gone through the entirety of the series, have some problems with Ron in Book 7, and I don't necessarily want to jump the tracks to talk about that just yet, but this is Ron Weasley. This is Ron who stood up to Draco Malfoy in the defense of Hermione, who sacrificed himself in wizard chess in order to get Harry closer to the Philosopher's Stone, who flew a Ford Anglia all the way to Hogwarts, who faced Aragog and the giant spiders in the Forbidden Forest, who challenged Severus Snape, who will stand by Harry when the going gets tough, mostly, and yet this is the same Ron who has been sulky about Hermione's infatuations in the past, starting with Gilderoy Lockhart, I suppose. He belittles her intelligence and her desire to learn. He complains about his family and his pet rat and his pet owl and being poor, and throws a world-class temper tantrum when Harry is selected for the Triwizard Tournament. All of this in addition to what I think can fairly be described as a spectacular lack of self-awareness, and as we'll see right at the end of tonight's reading, a particularly adolescent brand of hypocrisy. Is it fair to say, at the very least, that Ron's best days are behind him? Well, kind of, yes, I think. I think that by this point, your feelings for Ron are going to be either fixed by his previous endeavors, by his previous heroism, or they are going to be somewhat altered, somewhat diminished, somewhat diluted by the way that he behaves through the back half of the Harry Potter series. That seems to be pretty consistent. We don't really have time to talk about the ways in which Ron will surprise us for the best and the worst later in the series, but at this point, the primary problem, I think, is that he isn't as connected to the plot as he ought to be, and that is always going to be a challenge for the heart of the team versus the brain of the team or the body of the team. Hermione is mechanically useful to the plot in any number of ways, which makes it tangentially, parenthetically, all the more frustrating that Harry also seems to be critical of her intelligence and her desire for education and of her, help and assistance, but that's maybe a conversation for another day. Ron is supposed to be the binding force between his friends. He's supposed to mediate Harry's reckless desire for action, the ethos impulse, and Hermione's cool, pragmatic intellectualism, the logos impulse. He's supposed to be the Leonard Bones McCoy to their Kirk and Spock, or I suppose he's supposed to be the Uhura to their Kirk and Spock in the recent Star Trek movies. He's supposed to be the Amethyst to their Garnet and Pearl, the Ray Stantz to their Peter Venkman and Egon Spengler. And that's a tough gig, because while the ethos character is concerned with doing and the logos character is concerned with understanding, the pathos character is concerned with feeling, and that can be very difficult to communicate. We need to take some time to explore that, which is why quite often you will find that though the ethos character is driving the action, we're often in the POV of the pathos character, or we give them the opportunity to speak eloquently and articulately about the emotional consequence of the action that is being undertaken. And Ron, unfortunately, falters in that regard. He is, classically speaking, right, if we look at underlying narrative structure, he is insufficiently self-aware and insufficiently expressive to really fulfill his narrative duty here in the Harry Potter series. And that is complicated all the more as we transition from childhood into adulthood, which is certainly what the Goblet of Fire is about, right? That is one of the primary focuses of the Goblet of Fire. Indeed, never more so than in the chapters that we're going to discuss tonight as we approach the Yule Ball. So, is Ron Weasley the worst? Is he the best of us? Is he a good character? Well, the question, as I framed it here in a poll for the live audience, is quite simply, do you, as of Goblet of Fire, like Ron Weasley? And the possible answers are this. Yes, more than Hermione and Harry. Yes, more than Hermione, but not as much as Harry. Yes, more than Harry, but not as much as Hermione. Yes, but not as much as either Harry or Hermione. Or no, I don't like Ron at all. We will come back to that poll at the end of tonight's live session, and we can see at least what the live audience thinks of Ron Weasley. If you have thoughts about Ron, if you have an opinion to share or a perspective to offer, you can get in touch by emailing pointnorthmedia@gmail.com or stopping by the Point North Media forum at pointnorthmedia.com/forum. And there we can talk about this very complicated character who has absolutely, I will utterly concede, I will gladly and eagerly argue in Ron's favor for several events in the previous books, and even within the frame of this book to a lesser extent, perhaps. But yeah, the Ron thing is problematic, and certainly we are not seeing him at his best light as we move through these chapters. With all of that said, then, let's get into Chapter 21, the House Elf Liberation Front. We just concluded with the first task. We overcame dragons. We have Harry and Victor Crumb now tied in first place in the Triwizard Tournament, with Cedric in second and Fleur in third. They have each been granted their golden egg, which contains, we have been told by Ludo Bagman, some clue as to the next task, which will take place a couple of months hence. But first, Christmas. And before Christmas, house elves. Let's do this first. In fact, let's begin by looking at that clue itself. "Blimey, this is heavy," said Lee Jordan, picking up the golden egg which Harry had left on a table and weighing it in his hands. "Open it, Harry. Go on. Let's just see what's inside it." "He's supposed to work out the clue on his own," Hermione said swiftly. "It's in the tournament rules." "I'm supposed to work out how to get past the dragon on my own too," Harry muttered, so only Hermione could hear him, and she grinned rather guiltily. "Yeah, go on, Harry. Open it," several people echoed. Lee passed Harry the egg, and Harry dug his fingernails into the groove that ran all the way around it and prized it open. It was hollow and completely empty, but the moment Harry opened it, the most horrible noise, a loud and screechy wailing, filled the room. The nearest thing to it Harry had ever heard was the ghost orchestra at Nearly Headless Nick's death day party, who had all been playing the musical Saw. "Shut it!" Fred bellowed, his hands over his ears. "What was that?" said Seamus Finnegan, staring at the egg as Harry slammed it shut again. "Sounded like a banshee. Maybe we gotta get past one of those next, Harry." "It was someone being tortured," said Neville, who had gone very white and spilled sausage rolls all over the floor. "You're going to have to fight the Cruciatus curse." "Don't be a prat, Neville. That's illegal," said George. "They wouldn't use the Cruciatus curse on the champions." "Thought it sounded a bit like Percy singing. Maybe you've got to attack him while he's in the shower, Harry." While he's in the shower is an oddly specific and wet environment for George to leap to right there. Maybe that will come around in just a few pages' time. Maybe it'll come around next week, in fact, in our next reading from Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. This wailing, this ungodly, unearthly, unhallowed, if you'll forgive me, wailing, is a great clue for the next task. The existence of the clue itself seems to stress the framework of the Triwizard Tournament, right? The idea of the Triwizard Tournament, nominally at least, is that these three champions are going to be tested without expectation. They are going to be tested without knowing on what grounds the test is going to take place. This seems to be in contravention of that, and yet, as we see in this slide, that's the Triwizard Tournament all over. Last time we discussed Alistair Moody's assertion that in fact the Triwizard Tournament is just all about cheating. It has traditionally been all about cheating, though we must remember that it hasn't in fact been run for a very long time indeed, which many characters in tonight's reading will seem to have forgotten, not least of all, interestingly, Minerva McGonagall. None of these kids know about the Triwizard Tournament, so they are kind of making it up as they go along, and we might infer that they are not the only ones. The addition of this test does nothing, narratively speaking, but give us a hook to thread the first and second tests together, to suspend the Triwizard Tournament upon as we move from November into February, as we try and honor this year-long, this academic year-long structure that J.K. Rowling has insisted upon for all of her Harry Potter novels. And it gives us an opportunity to arrive at a reciprocal moment of kindness, a reciprocal moment of decency for Cedric Diggory, that he can give to Harry what Harry gave to him, that is to say, a vital clue going forward, though the circumstances surrounding that are going to be slightly different than the circumstances of Harry giving Cedric the clue regarding dragons. So that is, for the moment, all that we get on the Triwizard Tournament. We're going to spend the rest of the chapter down in the kitchens. We get some discussion of the treats that Fred and George have been plundering from the kitchen for basically as long as they have been at Hogwarts, and it finally occurs to some other characters, hey, where are the kitchens? Maybe we could go there. Maybe we could see what this is all about. And go they do. They go to tickle the portrait and find their way into the kitchens, where we meet an old familiar friend. Dobby, Harry gasped. "It is Dobby, sir! It is!" squealed the voice from somewhere around his navel. "Dobby has been hoping and hoping to see Harry Potter, sir, and Harry Potter has come to see him, sir!" Dobby let go and stepped back a few paces, beaming up at Harry, his enormous green tennis ball-shaped eyes brimming with tears of happiness. He looked almost exactly as Harry remembered him, the pencil-shaped nose, the bat-like ears, the long fingers and feet, all except the clothes, which were very different. When Dobby had worked for the Malfoys, he had always worn the same filthy old pillowcase. Now, however, he was wearing the strangest assortment of garments Harry had ever seen. He had done an even worse job of dressing himself than the wizards at the World Cup. He was wearing a tea cozy for a hat on which he had pinned a number of bright badges, a tie patterned with horseshoes over a bare chest, a pair of what looked like children's soccer shorts, and odd socks. One of these Harry saw was the black one Harry had removed from his own foot and tricked Mr. Malfoy into giving Dobby, thereby setting Dobby free. The other was covered in pink and orange stripes. "Dobby, what are you doing here?" Harry said in amazement. "Dobby has come to work at Hogwarts, sir!" Dobby squealed excitedly. "Professor Dumbledore gave Dobby and Winky jobs, sir!" "Winky?" said Harry. "She's here too?" "Yes, sir, yes!" said Dobby, and he seized Harry's hand and pulled him off into the kitchen between 4 long wooden tables that stood there. Each of these tables, Harry noticed as he passed them, was positioned exactly beneath the 4 house tables above in the Great Hall. At the moment they were clear of food, dinner having finished, and he supposed that an hour ago they had been laden with dishes that were then sent up through the ceiling to their counterparts above. At least 100 little elves were standing around the kitchen, beaming, bowing, and curtsying as Dobby led Harry past them. They were all wearing the same uniform, a tea towel stamped with the Hogwarts crest and tied, as Winky's had been, like a toga. So Dobby has been set free through the gift of clothing, and Dobby has now found his way back to Hogwarts and has assembled for himself as a free house elf quite the ensemble. I mean, say what you like, but it's a look. Like, the tea cozy for the hat raises a really interesting question, which is, house elves are freed when they are granted clothing by their masters. If Lucius Malfoy had given Dobby a tea cozy, would that have counted? Like, can a thing which can be adapted into clothing count as a token of a house elf's liberation? Probably not, I imagine, but it doesn't matter now because Hobby is free and can make whichever sartorial choices he chooses. I like the badges that are pinned to it too. I wish we'd gone into a little more detail. I would be very curious to know which badges Dobby had managed to find and which he had purchased with his own money since coming to Hogwarts. So this is our reintroduction to the house elf political subplot, I suppose. The SPEW, as Ron sarcastically calls it, the House Elf Liberation Front in the course of this chapter. But it's also our first real native perspective on house elves. We've only encountered Dobby and Winky previously, and we have encountered them in isolation. Not just in isolation, but in the context of their decontextualized existence, I suppose. We encounter them when they are isolated, when they are alone, when they are either actively or at least theoretically performing their duties. We haven't yet seen a number of house elves in community, and that community gives us a really interesting perspective on what it is to be a house elf. Winky, throughout the run of this chapter, gives us an interesting perspective on what it means to be a house elf, and we can see that in part. I mentioned this a little last time, the Aristotelian virtue ethical perspective on what it is to be a house elf. Winky observes that Dobby is a bad house elf because he wants to be paid and he wants to wear clothes and he wants to be free. That this is fundamentally, not objectively, morally a bad thing, but subjectively, contextually a bad thing. It is not that Dobby is capital B bad, it is that he is a bad house elf. And in Aristotelian virtue ethics, that matching of a moral judgment and a contextual community is absolutely vital, because we are only ever moral or amoral by the standards of Aristotelian virtue ethics, according to the standards of the community which we are a part of, the communities of which we are a part, I suppose I can say. So if everyone in the house elf community agrees that actually a servitude that is like unto slavery is good and noble and virtuous, then anyone who rejects that concept is a bad house elf. And that standard can only be set by the community itself. One of the interesting wrinkles when you're talking about the application of virtue ethics, particularly in the modern world, is that a virtue ethicist framework, I suppose, cannot be superimposed upon a foreign community. It cannot be emplaced upon a different community than the person who is making that moral judgment, right? Barty Crouch is not allowed to say, no, you are a bad house elf. I mean, he can say that. He can absolutely say that for personal and subjective reasons, but he is not allowed to claim the authority of Aristotle when he says that, right? That is a different kind of moral judgment. He is making the moral judgment of either an objective and absolute morality or a subjective morality based upon an entirely different community. It is kind of like the difference between being a good wizard and a bad wizard. You'll remember right back at the beginning of the book when we were talking about the Quidditch World Cup, we talked about the obliviation of memory that was occurring all across the United Kingdom, right? That wizards in vast numbers were coming to the UK, were coming specifically to England to witness the Quidditch World Cup, and that innocent muggles were having their memories erased hither and yon with great frequency and rapidity and regularity, in fact. And we questioned at the time, is this okay? Is this all right? And certainly it is okay and all right. It is a moral good by the standards of the wizarding community. We see this all the time in the interaction between wizards and muggles, right? The desire to keep muggles in the dark, either because the wizard community is vulnerable to them, as it is presented to us in the first two books, or because the muggle community is vulnerable to wizards, as is presented to us in the third and fourth books in the series. That is a choice. That is a moral call there. And certainly there are morally relative arguments surrounding it. You know, that argument looks very different from the perspective of a muggle than it does from the perspective of a wizard. And it looks very different from the perspective of the aforementioned Ron Weasley, I suppose, than it does from, you know, Cornelius Fudge's perspective or even Albus Dumbledore's perspective. And I mentioned both Fudge and Dumbledore, of course, because they are representatives of their own inherent authority structures within the wizarding world, both the kind of civil structure and the academic structure, which we are paying the most attention to here in the pages of Harry Potter. Is Dobby a bad house elf? Well, by the standards of house elf society, yes, he is. He is failing to fulfill the role given to him by his community. Now, one of the interesting things about this virtue ethicist argument is that it is morally ambiguous. It is not in any way morally assertive. That is to say that you cannot logically and reasonably take in your own exterior, your external moral framework into that community and apply it as casually or as objectively as you might wish to. We can still say that, yes, it is possible for Dobby to be a bad house elf, and also the structures surrounding house elf society, even here at Hogwarts, are questionable, are wildly, wildly dubious. More on that as we continue to move through the SPEW subplot, though that, I'm pretty glad to say, is mostly, that's almost all that we're going to deal with this week. This takes us to the telling of secrets from house elves. But you can say what you like about the Malfoys now, Harry asked him, grinning. A slightly fearful look came into Dobby's immense eyes. Dobby could, he said doubtfully. He squared his small shoulders. Dobby could tell Harry Potter that his old masters were bad dark wizards. Dobby stood for a moment, quivering all over, horror-struck by his own daring. But then he rushed over to the nearest table and began banging his head on it very hard, squealing, "Bad Dobby! Bad Dobby!" Harry seized Dobby by the back of his tie and pulled him away from the table. "Thank you, Harry Potter, thank you," said Dobby breathlessly, rubbing his head. "You just need a bit of practice," Harry said. "Practice?" squealed Winky furiously. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Dobby, talking that way about your masters." "They isn't my masters anymore, Winky," said Dobby defiantly. "Dobby doesn't care what they think anymore." "Oh, you is a bad elf, Dobby, moaned Winky, tears leaking down her face once more. My poor Mr. Crouch, what is he doing without Winky? He is needing me, he is needing my help. I is looking after the Crouches all my life, and my mother is doing it before me, and my grandmother is doing it before her. Oh, what is they saying if they knew Winky was freed? Oh, the shame, the shame! She buried her face in her skirt again and bawled. So obviously this is the point that I was just making. I possibly should have waited until after this slide was over to talk so much about Aristotelian virtue ethics, but it is still interesting to see how the rules and standards are applied in this moment of transition, at this point of inflection in our understanding and Dobby's understanding and Winky's understanding and the house elves collectively understanding of what it is to be a house elf. We know that they keep secrets, and this is so natural now to Dobby. This is so inculcated for Dobby right now that he still responds in the way that he always did, banging his head against the table. Bad Dobby, even though he has just confirmed, I mean, something which we all knew to be true, something which it comes as not one whit of a surprise to anyone, and we can tell that it's not a surprise to anyone. We can tell that this is not supposed to carry any narrative significance at all by the fact that Harry doesn't respond at all, right? They're bad dark wizards! And Harry's just like, yeah, it's cool. You just need some more practice talking smack about the Malfoys, Dobby. You'll be just fine, I promise. Like, Ron can help you out. He's very, very good at it, it turns out. That might be Ron's superpower, actually, is talking smack about the Malfoys. It's all going to be fine. Practice, squealed Winky furiously. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Dobby, talking that way about your masters. And the role, I fear that I just don't have time to get into this tonight because we do have so many slides, and there will be far better opportunities to talk about this even within the frame of this book. But that notion of shame is a powerful one, because if we accept the idea that communities autonomously enforce and regulate their own moralistic frameworks. That is to say that communities police themselves. They establish their most mythic underpinnings, I suppose. They tell the story of their own formation. They tell their story of their own morality, and then they actively police that morality as they move forward. Shame becomes a powerful weapon. Shame becomes a very useful tool in those that seek to preserve the status quo. Rebels and revolutionaries, those who seek to advance, those who seek to change the world, have to be liberated from shame. Shame is that sense of silent judgment, right? Shame is distinct from guilt in that guilt recognizes the internal understanding that we have gone awry, that we ourselves have done something wrong. Shame is the version of guilt that is externalized. We often feel guilt and shame together. I have done something bad. I know I have done something bad. That is guilt. You know I have done something bad. That is shame. But shame, when it is weaponized, can be applied to anyone. Shame, when it is weaponized, can be applied to people who do not feel that sense of guilt, as Dobby does not feel that sense of guilt. And shame, as mentioned earlier, that we cannot rely when we're dealing with the ethics of a unified community like this. When we're dealing with the virtue ethicist argument, we cannot superimpose a moral framework from another community or another authority onto that community. We can't. That's philosophically inconsistent and also practically inconsistent, right? This is why when we seek to dominate external communities, we tell them first stories about themselves. We don't say, oh, you're a bad person for not wearing blue every Tuesday. What a ridiculous notion. Everyone knows that you should wear blue on a Tuesday. No. Instead, we tell stories about why great examples of that community wear blue on a Tuesday. I am picking, obviously, a completely ridiculous and harmless example of this, but that is how we seek to control and to dominate and to supersede the pre-existing moral frameworks associated with communities which are not our own. But we also seek to do it through shame. We seek to do it through that silent voice of judgment. Stay tuned, I guess, for some more thoughts on shame as we approach the end of this story. That is it for chapter 21. Let me see here. On Wednesdays, we wear pink, says Reed. Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. My God. And you'll never find better examples of very insulated and also very self-regulated moral communities than high school. Rahid is referencing Mean Girls there, which is a perfect example, right? If you've ever thought about high school cliques, that is actually a great example of differing internal community-oriented moral structures. Aristotle Aristotle would have had a blast if high schools had been invented back in ancient Greece, I suppose, is what I'm saying. Yeah. Ryan saying, maybe their owner family breeds them like horses. Oh, we're talking about Winky and Winky's mother and her grandmother before her. A very disturbing element of this dialogue, by the way, and one which did not open itself up to me until I had read this book like 2 or 3 times, I guess. I'd never really paid that much attention to that beat. But yes, that is really disturbing. Ryan, to continue that thought, says, maybe the owner family breeds them like horses, adds to the slave parallel, and would be one of the most problematic parts of the idea. Like one day Crouch would have said, okay, Winky, time to have a baby, makes me cringe. Absolutely, absolutely, and is... Well, gosh, I feel as though we've talked about the uncomfortable parallelism in which J.K. Rowling is engaged throughout Goblet of Fire, throughout the SPEW plotline, throughout the whole house elf secondary creation, I suppose, right? Through the whole world building practice that yields house elves at the end. We've talked about the uncomfortable parallelism between this slave allegory and real life slave history, real world slave history. But this is very quietly one of the points that connects these two ideas in a profoundly disturbing way. This is horrifying, as it should be horrifying, but it also doesn't fall into that trap of being too heavy-handed, which some of the slavery allegory here in Goblet of Fire does, right? This is, because it's thrown out here, because it's not interrogated, we are free to draw that connection. We are free to find the applicability, the resonant applicability of that idea with real-world histories of slavery, but we're not forced to. J.K. Rowling doesn't need to assert it. She can just present it. And that is, I think, a much more powerful take on this kind of allegory writing. Yeah. Let me see. There are a lot of people in the Q&A that want Alistair to answer unanswerable house elf speculations, says Joseph. Well, we'll delve into the Q&A box right at the end of tonight's session. We'll come full circle back to house elves, I am sure. First, though, we have to move on to chapter 22, The Unexpected Task, which is actually a lovely chapter title. Like, I love the way that J.K. Rowling is just playing very lightly here with the notion of actually the obligations of being champion don't just extend to the 3 tasks which might kill you. They also extend to another task which might just ruin you, might just destroy you personally on like an intimate emotional level. Let's look at the ball that Minerva McGonagall presents to us here. The Yule Ball is approaching, a traditional part of the Triwizard Tournament and an opportunity for us to socialise with our foreign guests. Now, the ball will only be open to 4th years and above, although you may invite a younger student if you wish. Lavender Brown let out a shrill giggle. Parvati Patil nudged her hard in the ribs, her face working furiously as she too fought not to giggle. They both looked around at Harry. Professor McGonagall ignored them, which Harry thought was distinctly unfair, as she had just told off him and Ron. Dress robes will be worn, Professor McGonagall continued, and the ball will start at 8 o'clock on Christmas Day, finishing at midnight in the Great Hall. Now then, Professor McGonagall stared deliberately around the class. The Yule Ball is, of course, a chance for us all to, let our hair down, she said in a disapproving voice. Lavender giggled harder than ever with her hand pressed hard against her mouth to stifle the sound. Harry could see what she thought was funny this time. Professor McGonagall, with her hair in a tight bun, looked as though she had never let her hair down in any sense. But that does not mean, Professor McGonagall went on, that we will be relaxing the standards of behaviour we expect from Hogwarts students. I will be most seriously displeased if a Gryffindor student embarrasses the school in any way. This is a traditional part of the Triwizard Tournament. And those who have heard about the Triwizard Tournament are familiar with the concept of the Yule Ball. We know this to be true because, of course, Molly Weasley packed Ron off with his new formal robes. This is not a part of regular Hogwarts attire. They have, in fact, never before been mentioned. How much do the older people, the generation above Harry and Ron and Hermione and Lavender and Parvati here, how much do they know about the Triwizard Tournament? To what degree was the Triwizard Tournament a part of their educational experience at Hogwarts? And to what degree has it simply been resurrected? Because it doesn't seem as though any of the other students knew about this. It doesn't seem as though anyone at Hogwarts knew that the Yule Ball was coming. This is presented to us as though it is quite the revelation, not least of all because of the giggling which attends its announcement. I'm fascinated by the role of the Triwizard Tournament, and I'm becoming increasingly convinced, I'll put it this way, that J.K. Rowling is guilty of the kind of temporal inflation, the chronological inflation to which fantasy authors fall foul on a regular basis, or of which fantasy authors fall foul on a regular basis. That is to say that when you are writing a fantasy story, it is easy to say, yes, of course, that happened 25 years ago, but it is far more impressive to say, oh, of course, that happened 2,500 years ago. And we've seen this kind of thing happen all the time throughout Hogwarts, right? Hogwarts is an absolutely ancient edifice. Hogwarts was created as a school before there was any concept of modern schooling, and that is not to say that Hogwarts has not evolved over the years. It is not to say that the wizarding community at large has not evolved over the course of the years. But there are roots deep in wizarding society that extend back to the kind of medievalism that we were talking about back in the first and second books, primarily, right? That kind of medievalism has kind of fallen away now. We don't generally preserve this idea that the more antique and antiquated something is, the better it is. Now we're actually interested in the evolution of the wizarding community, and this could arguably be presented as a kind of wizarding renaissance, right? That is to say that the first wizarding world, like the rise of Voldemort, was roughly analogous to a wizarding dark age, I suppose, and we've now come out of the dark age and we're moving through the post-medieval period up to this point, and maybe 4 years ago, around the time that Harry started at Hogwarts, or 3.5 years ago, I guess, when Harry started at Hogwarts, we began to move into something that is roughly analogous to the Renaissance, to the Enlightenment, that we are once again looking forward with hope. It's possible. It's absolutely possible. It's also possible that J.K. Rowling's understanding of the wizarding world shifted. It just changed over the course of the years of writing these books. That would be completely normal and completely natural too. I do find myself a little distracted about the enormous antiquity of the Triwizard Tournament and how pervasive it is in popular culture, because it seems surprising. My workaround for this, by the way, like my logical resolution to this, is that Arthur Weasley was told about the Yule Ball and specifically told Molly. That is to say that it is still intended to be a surprise for all of the students of Hogwarts. The students of Hogwarts are not supposed to know about it, but Molly knew about it enough to give Ron his formal robes. That's why no one's talking about it, though even then, there are suggestions, right, from Charlie, from Percy, even from Molly, that they know more than the current students at Hogwarts. I wonder if there is a 6th year class or a 7th year class about, the history of the Triwizard Tournament. I wonder if that's an elective that you can take in your 6th year at Hogwarts. I just don't know. But here we're seeing Minerva McGonagall's perspective on the festivities, yes, on the Yule Ball itself specifically, but also you can infer on the Triwizard Tournament in general. This is not appropriate. This is not something that the school ought to be engaged in. And we're going to see this as we move through these chapters, that the kids are given, basically extra weeks of vacation time. No one is holding them to their class schedule this year because of the Triwizard Tournament. And that's great and all, but they are supposed to be here for an education. They are supposed to be here to learn to be the next generation of young witches and wizards, the only generation of witches and wizards which are going to arise here in the United Kingdom, right? There are going to be other students coming out of other schools, certainly, and presumably this is nothing like as disruptive to Beauxbaton and Durmstrang. There's no assertion at all that the delegations from Beauxbaton and Durmstrang represent the entire student body of those schools. They are delegations. That presumably is why they are accompanied by a single chaperone, a single, headmaster, headmistress, a single professor, a single figure of authority on this journey. So presumably Beauxbaton and Durmstrang are going to carry on pretty much as expected. They'll get, the day off to remotely view the tasks. I mean, we can imagine that someone somewhere is frantically taking pictures for whatever the local equivalent of the Daily Prophet is, and they'll be able to look over the events of the tasks themselves. But their schooling will not be interrupted the same way that Hogwarts schooling is. And I read from Minerva McGonagall here a certain dismissive attitude toward, yes, the specific festivities, and this is a stern warning that, yeah, this is your first school dance. I know what teenagers are like. This is not my first rodeo. Parenthetically, the Yule Ball will not be a rodeo, just so you know. That won't be expected, but you will all be in formal wear, so, tread easy. But no one is going to embarrass Gryffindor. I will be most seriously displeased if a Gryffindor student embarrasses the school in any way. I love Minerva McGonagall, and will basically never pass up the opportunity to talk about her for just a little bit, yes. Apparently, says L'Hôpital here, apparently the Triwizard Tournament is much more important than education. Yes, exactly, right? And Marshall wondering, I wonder if McGee had some, the chat scrolled, forgive me. Marshall Moore wondering, I wonder if McGee had some wild Yule balls in her time at Hogwarts. Presumably not. There was no Triwizard Tournament. Well, as far as we know, though, I don't think that we know how old Minerva McGonagall is. Not based in the books, anyway. I'm sure there's a Pottermore entry saying, yes, yeah, JY is pointing out, but the Yule Ball only happens with the Triwizard Tournament. I think, yeah, as is confirmed by Harry when he says that, when the narrative assures us that, in fact, more kids have chosen to stay at Hogwarts for the Christmas holidays than ever before. Basically, functionally, everyone. We don't name check anyone who's actually left, and I can't think of a significant character. Does Lee Jordan get mentioned in the Yule Ball at all? Seamus does, I believe. Yeah, I think pretty much the entire student body of Hogwarts, for basically the first time ever, stays through the Christmas holidays, which you'd think, if nothing else, would be a formidable administrative achievement, right? Let's keep pushing onward here as we move past the announcement of the Yule Ball to Yule itself as Christmas comes to Hogwarts. The Hogwarts staff, demonstrating a continued desire to impress the visitors from Beauxbaton and Durmstrang, seemed determined to show the castle at its best this Christmas. When the decorations went up, Harry noticed that they were the most stunning he had yet seen inside the school. Everlasting icicles had been attached to the banisters of the marble staircase. The usual 12 Christmas trees in the Great Hall were bedecked with everything from luminous holly berries to real hooting golden owls. And the suits of armour had all been bewitched to sing carols whenever anyone passed them. It was quite something to hear "O Come All Ye Faithful" sung by an empty helmet that only knew half the words. Several times, Filch the caretaker had to extract Peeves from inside the armour, where he had taken to hiding, filling in the gaps in the songs with lyrics of his own invention, all of which were very rude. And still, Harry hadn't asked Cho to the ball. He and Ron were getting very nervous now, though, as Harry pointed out, Ron would look much less stupid than he would without a partner. Harry was supposed to be starting the dancing with the other champions. There's something, if you'll forgive me, magical about Christmas at Hogwarts. Anyway, there was something doubly magical. The magic of this particularly English perspective on Christmas, I think. This Christmas of storybook and myth, this Christmas of Charles Dickens, right? Dickens created modern Christmas when he wrote A Christmas Carol. This is an attested phenomenon in the late 19th century, and absolutely spoke in favor of Christmas as he went from town to town as a part of his many speaking tours, where he would perform the abridged one-man version of A Christmas Carol for grateful audiences. Charles Dickens invented English Christmas, and it is English Christmas that we see here presented at Hogwarts. And I'm kind of conflating the notions of Englishness and Scottishness there. Scottish Christmas is a little different in that we have our own second tier of traditions, I suppose, but certainly by the time that I remember Christmas, by the time that I was aware enough to even think of Christmas as a thing, it had been superseded by a very English Christmas sensibility. And that's what we're getting here at Hogwarts. It is magical, it is mythic, it is doubly magical, of course, because it's Hogwarts. It's not just anywhere, though the vague descriptions, the general descriptions, could stand a casual scrutiny as belonging to any festive location in the United Kingdom. And there is here an interesting curiosity. O Come All Ye Faithful is a Christmas carol. That is an actual authentic Christmas carol, and this is one of the very few moments in which we acknowledge the existence of Christian faith in particular within the frame of Harry Potter. Harry Potter is, and we've talked about this a little before, right? Harry Potter is a typically British kind of it is typically British in its regard for and relationship to questions of faith, right? It is kind of genially and amicably agnostic. It probably, if pushed, believes in God. It probably, if pushed, would describe itself as C of E or C of S, Church of England, Church of Scotland. It would describe itself as being kind of, I don't know, cheerfully Anglican or something, right? There would be a kind of minimum commitment kind of faith underpinning life at Hogwarts in exactly the same way as it underpins life in Britain in general. But this is curiously specific and not just a little charged. This is one of those moments where I'm reminded that this is a British series of books, because I don't think that an American writer would do something like this so casually. It would either be removed because it is non-specific, or it would be doubled down upon because it was absolutely intentional, right? The specificity would be raised, the specificity would be heightened. But in this instance, as in so many other instances throughout British public life, throughout British pop culture, throughout the Harry Potter series in general, in this instance, O Come All Ye Faithful, though it is a song of faith, has been so utterly secularized that it might as well be Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. For its religious connotation, it might as well be Jingle Bells, or it might as well be, We're Walking in the Air from the Snowman, right? Though it is a song of faith, though it is absolutely resonant in that regard, that resonance has been so completely superseded by that very casual, very polite, very private, and very low commitment kind of connection with faith and matters religious that it isn't, I think, supposed to be more expansive. I think I am noting it here because of my time here in the United States, when points of reference which are intended to be religiously significant are handled with a great deal more care. I think I've framed that about as carefully as I can. Yes, as Recyclops is pointing out, it's less agnostic in the US, I think. Yeah, I would say so too. That certainly is. Yeah. Good, okay. All right, let's... Kate saying, as an atheist, I disagree about the secularness of O Come All Ye Faithful. No, right, I completely agree. If you look at the song itself, it is absolutely not like a secular song whatsoever. But there is this tradition in British festivity, in the treatment of the Christmas season in Britain, right? We don't have in Britain, and I'm speaking as someone who hasn't spent a Christmas in Britain for almost 10 years, so forgive me if this has changed over the course of the last decade, but to the best of my recollection and memory, we really don't have the same kind of discourse about Christmas as a holiday that you have here in the United States. There isn't that push-pull kind of, are we supposed to say Merry Christmas? Are we supposed to say Happy Holidays? Are we supposed to, talk about other festivities that are happening at the same time? Christmas is partly because of the primary influence of Charles Dickens, right? Christmas was de-religiousized, was secularized back in the 19th century in the United Kingdom, much more powerfully than it is here in the US. I would argue, at least. This is perhaps a little outside of my comfort zone, where I'm comfortable asserting these things to be true with absolute authority, but certainly that is my impression and my intent, and that, I think, is why O Come All Ye Faithful being deliberately named here stands out to me more now than it ever did reading these books before. Yeah. Right, saying, well, yeah, I mean, there's a war on Christmas in the United States. Didn't you know, Alistair? Yeah, no, you're right. I'm expecting my draft papers anytime now for the war against Christmas. I love Christmas. Have I mentioned that? I probably have mentioned that since we talk about Christmas every season here on Dear Mr. Potter. I love Christmas. Christmas is a very special thing. And I particularly love, despite my time here in the US, I particularly love that Dickensian secularized Christmas, because I am all about... I love Christmas, British Christmas, and this I do think might actually be a point of clarification here, right? We don't have Thanksgiving in Britain, so we don't get our secular, warm, everyone just feels good about everything holiday in Britain, because we hold all of that stuff back for Christmas. Here in the US, you have Thanksgiving, and so I think Christmas does have a special and distinct quality to it that is lacking in the UK. I am sure there are more educated and skilled people who can break this down for you. If you find an interesting link out there on the internet, an interesting podcast episode, please send it my way, because I'm genuinely very curious. So, Christmas has come to Hogwarts. All of that is to say here as I glance nervously at the clock. Christmas has come to Hogwarts. Harry still has not asked Cho out to the dance, so he's about to. Cho, can I have a word with you? Giggling should be made illegal, Harry thought furiously as all the girls around Cho started doing it. She didn't, though. She said, okay, and followed him out of earshot of her classmates. Harry turned to look at her and his stomach gave a weird lurch as though he had missed a step going downstairs. He said. He couldn't ask her. He couldn't, but he had to. Cho stood there looking puzzled, watching him. The words came out before Harry had quite got his tongue around them. Wangoballwime? Sorry, said Cho. Do you want to go to the ball with me? Said Harry. Why did he have to go red now? Why? Oh, said Cho. And she went red too. Oh, Harry, I'm really sorry. And she truly looked at, I've already said I'll go with someone else. Oh, said Harry. It was odd. A moment before, his insides had been writhing like snakes, but suddenly he didn't seem to have any insides at all. Oh, okay, he said. No problem. I'm really sorry, she said again. Turns out that Cho Chang is going to the Yule Ball with one Cedric Diggory. More on that later. C-Star saying, all these kids think the Yule Ball is their one and only chance to express attraction to someone and that they will be forever lost to them if they fail. Boy, I can relate. Yes, no kidding. The pressure that is being put on these poor kids, particularly the champions. I mean, It's a little more forgivable if we remember that the champions are supposed to be 17, right? That's a little more forgivable. It's a little more understandable. It's complicated still further, by the way, with McGonagall throwing in this rule that, well, of course, only 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th years will be allowed to go, but you can ask whoever you want. I don't know. Ask a second year. Ask someone from the faculty. Ask one of Hagrid's blast-ended scroots. It'll be fine. Okay, maybe this is one of these circumstances in which tighter regulation will actually help these kids out, right? Or we'll hold the reins a little tighter, and maybe it'll just make it a little easier. I don't know, but here we are nonetheless. I love Harry asking Cho. I love the nervousness. I love the anxiety. I love the way that the adolescent experience is represented here. So often in the Harry Potter novels, we expand the adolescent experience. We expand the experience, the emotional experience, to fill the available space, right? We have created this huge canvas of good wizards and bad wizards and magic spells and cursed artifacts and mythical creatures and cryptozoological creatures and ancient schools and all of this other material. We've expanded the canvas. That's one of the things that we turn to fantasy fiction for, right? The epic scale of the secondary creation. In order to fill that, however, you have to inflate the emotional stakes. You have to inflate the emotional entanglements and engagements of the characters who live in that world. That is why fantasy and science fiction and horror trend toward the operatic. It's why we trend toward the melodramatic, because you've got to have big feels to fill the big world that you've been given. But the Yule Ball is not a big world. We actually collapse Hogwarts back down. We get this that was one of the reasons that I pulled that previous slide about Christmas coming to Hogwarts, is to emphasize how cozy Hogwarts is at this point in the book. We bring it all the way back down. We are barely acknowledging the existence of unnamed students at this point, right? Harry and Ron are bouncing through the named cast of the book, trying to find a date, and we're doing that to make it all the more intimate and all the more personal, all the more connected, and we're allowing, rather than expanding the emotional scale to fit the world, we're drawing in the world. We're not compressing exactly, but we're making the world more intimate in order to match the emotional scale of these experiences. I actually really rather love it, and though it is a little atypical for J.K. Rowling, Wangoballwime is incredibly sweet and incredibly touching and just plain lovely. Also, Cho Chang, one of the finest human beings that you're going to meet. I had to actively resist the urge, just parenthetically, to make Cho Chang Scottish, because thanks to the movies now, Cho Chang is 100% Scottish. She's got that absolutely charming Edinburgh accent. That is what I associate with Cho Chang now, but I'm already doing a few Scottish accents as we read Harry Potter, so I'm not going to add another one into the mix there. All right, let me catch up here. We've got, will Wangoballwime work on a Potterhead, though, says JY. You know, there's only one way to find out, right? That's a great idea. We have to throw a Harry Potter-themed Yule Ball, and the only couples who are allowed to go are those couples who have been awkwardly asked, Wangoballwime? I think that's absolutely the way to do it. Hashtag #OneGoBall with me, I think, is going to take over Twitter in just the next few days. Yeah, that's a lovely thing. Good. Ryan says, bouncing through the named cast, new band name. Called it. Good. Excellent. All right, let's keep pushing on to our last slide from this chapter, where we discover that Ron asked Fleur. I don't know what made me do it, Ron gasped again. What was I playing at? There were people all around. I've gone mad. Everyone watching. I was just walking past her in the entrance hall. She was standing there talking to Diggory, and it sort of came over me, and I asked her. Ron moaned and put his face in his hands. He kept talking, though the words were barely distinguishable. She looked at me like it was a sea slug or something, didn't even answer, and then, I don't know, I just sort of came to my senses and ran for it. She's part Vila, said Harry. You were right. Her grandmother was one. It wasn't your fault. I bet you just walked past when she was turning on the old charm for Diggory and got a blast of it. But she was wasting her time. He's going with Cho Chang. Ron looked up. I asked her to go with me just now, Harry said dully, and she told me. Ginny had suddenly stopped, smiling. This is mad, said Ron. We're the only ones left who haven't got anyone. Well, except Neville. Hey, guess who he asked? Hermione. What? Said Harry, completely distracted by this startling news. Yeah, I know, said Ron, some of the colour coming back into his face as he started to laugh. He told me after potions. Said she's always been really nice, helping him out with work and stuff, but she told him she was already going with someone. Ha! As if! She just didn't want to go with Neville. I mean, who would? Don't, said Ginny, annoyed. Don't laugh. Just then, Hermione climbed in through the portrait hole. Why weren't you two at dinner? She said, coming over to join them. Because, oh, shut up laughing, you two. Because they've both just been turned down by girls they asked to the ball, said Ginny. That shut Harry and Ron up. Thanks a bunch, Ginny, said Ron, sourly. Well, we are continuing our list here of female students at Hogwarts, talented young witches of their age who are just the best. We've acknowledged Cho Chang. Let's now acknowledge Hermione Granger and Ginny Weasley. I adore Ginny Weasley, as you know. This is another great example of Ginny getting a full story that is happening right on the edge of the page, right? A story that is so on the fringes of the narrative perspective here that it might as well be marginalia. I love the way that J.K. Rowling consistently handles Ginny through this series, or I guess pretty much up to this point. It's just lovely. Poor, heartbroken Ginny. But good news, you guys, she's going to end up going to the Yule Ball with Neville. Neville has already asked her, in fact, because he was turned down by Hermione. It sucks not to be someone's first choice. While we're paying close attention to this scene, though, which, yes, I absolutely would have picked, even if it was just for Ginny. I didn't just pick it for Ginny, though. I also picked it for Harry and Ron and Fleur Delacour. Why did Ron ask Fleur to go to the ball? Why has Ron been procrastinating for the last, I don't know, week, waiting to ask someone but anyone to go to the dance with him? Well, I think that the text urges us to believe that Ron has been waiting to ask Fleur in exactly the same way as Harry has been waiting to ask Cho. And if that is true, we end up with a moment here which is slightly complicated and inadvertently problematic on Harry's part, right? If we assert Ron has been attracted to Fleur from the moment that she arrived, and many other boys have been too, but it doesn't have the power that the Vila had back at the Quidditch World Cup. You'll remember that Harry was very nearly as enchanted as Ron by the performance of the Vila back at the Quidditch World Cup, right? Harry is not enchanted by Fleur. He's not attracted to Fleur by any measure, it would seem. Certainly, if we acknowledge that the narrative voice is, in part, at least Harry's, then yes, all of that gliding and sweeping and long, lustrous silver hair, like, okay, maybe Harry at least recognizes that she is an attractive young woman, but he's not interested in her because he's interested in Cho, right? So here, Ron, to my mind, has been pining for Fleur in exactly the same way as Harry has been pining for Cho. They have been summoning up their courage. They have been, getting ready for this arduous, terrible ordeal, this unexpected task of having to find a date for the Yule Ball. And Ron simply asks her in exactly the way as Harry just asked Cho, right? They've decided that today's the day. They both agree. Today is the day. We absolutely have to get a date today or we're done. We're sunk. That's it. It's over. So Harry stiffens his courage. He stiffens his resolve and he asks Cho out and she turns him down. Ron, I think, to my reading, does exactly the same with Fleur. And then Harry offers compensation. She looked at me like I was a sea slug or something, didn't even answer. And then, I don't know, I just sort of came to my senses and ran for it. So Ron says, hey, Fleur, you want to go to the dance? And she looks at him like he's a sea slug and he runs away. To which Harry responds, she's part Vila. You were right, her grandmother was one. It wasn't your fault. I bet you just walked past when she was turning on the old charm for Diggory and got a blast of it. But she was wasting her time. He's going with Cho Chang. I bet that your attraction to this girl is entirely this girl's fault. And I bet that the humiliation that you suffered when you asked this girl out is also entirely her fault. And I bet that women are to blame for the emotional turmoil that we are experiencing right now, old buddy, old pal, old friend of mine. I bet that women, in fact, are the problem. And I bet not just that she's part Vila, not just that it is her natural state, not just that she is magically attractive to you, Ron, weirdly for some reason, but also I bet she was trying to snare Diggory. I bet that she was being manipulative too. I bet that she was engaged in some dubious skullduggery, some shenanigans here with Cedric Diggory, and you just caught the blast, and you obviously cannot be held responsible for this. It's all her fault. It is, it pains me to say, adolescently true. And it does also pain me to observe, by the way, that Harry and Ron are so emotionally unsophisticated that it all but beggars belief. This is the point, I suppose, at which Harry Potter reaches peak mid-century British boarding school adventure, right? Because one of the interesting things about those British boarding school adventures that I've mentioned before about St. Trinians and about the Fantastic Four, not so much the Fantastic Four, not so much the origin of the Marvel comic book universe. No, I'm thinking more of the Famous Five than the Fantastic Four, but I think you'll forgive my misspeak there. when we're thinking of St. Trinians, and we're thinking of Just William, and we're thinking of the Famous Five, and we're thinking of the Secret Seven, we're thinking of these boarding school adventures, they are all pretty comprehensively asexual. There is no romance, no kind of sexual attraction, no chemistry of any kind. That is just a thing that we do. In fact, the comic strip, a British comedic troupe back in the 1980s, actually delighted in putting together what was that? A TV movie, a one-off special? I forget exactly how it was structured, called Five Go Camping, I believe, which was a kind of updated version of the Famous Five, where the Famous Five are all played by adults, and there is, of course, lashings of sexual tension. And it was funny and also awful and uncomfortable and, exactly the thing that a parody should be. These books are pretty strictly devoid of romance. And this, I think, is echoed here in the pages of Harry Potter, in that these kids are 14. These kids are, some of them presumably 15 at this point. They should at least be aware of the social conventions surrounding flirtation. Harry, at least, okay? Harry hasn't got the grounding that the other kids have in the wizarding world, of course, but he has a grounding in the Muggle world, and he was growing up in the late 1980s, and there is just no way in hell that he isn't at least familiar with concepts like dates and school dances, and even, the American incursion of the prom, or I should say the incursion of the Americanized prom, right? This idea of American school dances, which I did not have when I was a kid, but which came to Britain shortly thereafter. The whole notion of the big school, I had school discos, you guys. I went and swayed awkwardly with girls for a bit. I remember those evenings as being every bit as harrowing as these experiences too for Harry and Ron. But this is an example of Harry and Ron being emotionally unsophisticated. This entire chapter is an example of Harry and Ron being emotionally unsophisticated. But this carries with it that air of entitlement and that air of blame, which too often in our real world political and cultural discourse has been co-opted by men who wish to blame women for all the evils of the world, but most specifically the evils of their own emotional stunting, right? Their own emotional unavailability, their own emotional unsophistication. I'm a nice guy. Why don't girls like me? I'm a nice guy, tips the fedora, etc., 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 right? This is some proto-MRA nonsense right here in the pages of Harry Potter. And I don't think that Harry means it that way, right? I think that he is just trying to comfort his friend. I just don't want to let this go by without acknowledging, no, this is absolutely potentially problematic. Not potentially in the sense that, hey, if you read this carefully enough, you'll find it really troubling, but this is the seed of something that could in the real world become very difficult later. I'm glad to say that it won't, right? I'm glad to say that we're not actually going to go down that road. I'm glad to say that that Harry and Ron are not going to spend their senior year at Hogwarts just hanging out on 4chan being utterly vile about women and basically everyone else in the world who isn't exactly like them. That is not how this story is going to go, thank goodness. In the real world, it goes that way all too often. Let's move on to the Yule Ball, shall we? Let's get to some celebration, shall we? Let's just try and move past this, right? We're talking about Hermione Danger saying in the chat, oh God, now I just pictured Harry tipping a fedora and saying milady and, yeah, pretty bad, right? Yes, good. That's a lovely thing. C-Star pointing out, I still don't understand the conventions around flirtation. I didn't even try to flirt until age 20 and failed at it then. You know what? Some people flirt, some people don't flirt. Not flirting is flirting for people who don't flirt, right? We shouldn't accept that we shouldn't believe, we certainly shouldn't contend that there is a single acceptable mode of interaction for anyone, right? We normalize this too swiftly and far too comprehensively. This is a thing. Oh, gosh, okay, I can't. 30 seconds on this, all right? Every single interaction that you have with another human being is unique. And when we try to render those unique interactions into this framework of consensus and conventionality, everyone but everyone is going to be disappointed except for those people who strike the median perfectly, and those people are going to feel unexceptional. They're going to feel as though they are performatively going through the motions. Celebrate the diversity in human interaction. Please, I beg of you, celebrate the flirtation that comes when flirtation flirtation happens and the lack of flirtation that comes when flirtation doesn't happen, right? Celebrate small talk if you love small talk. Celebrate the absence of small talk if you abhor small talk. Find people who interest you and engage with them in a way that is organic and unique, and you will be happier people, and the world, I promise you, will be a better place. That is my motivational speech for this week's Dear Mr. Potter. Let's move into chapter 23 and the Yule Ball here. We begin in the days before the ball. Snow was falling thickly upon the castle and its grounds now. The pale blue Beauxbaton carriage looked like a large, chilly, frosted pumpkin next to the iced gingerbread house that was Hagrid's cabin, while the Durmstrang ship's portholes were glazed with ice, the rigging white with frost. The house elves down in the kitchen were outdoing themselves with a series of rich, warming stews and savoury puddings, and only Fleur Delacour seemed to be able to find anything to complain about. "It is too heavy, oh, this Hogwarts food," they heard her saying grumpily as they left the great hall behind her one evening, Ron skulking behind Harry, keen not to be spotted by Fleur. "I will not fit into my dress robes." "Oh, there's a tragedy," Hermione snapped as Fleur went out into the entrance hall. "She really thinks a lot of herself, that one, doesn't she?" "Hermione, who are you going to the ball with?" said Ron. He kept springing this question on her, hoping to startle her into a response by asking it when she least expected it. However, Hermione merely frowned and said, "I'm not telling you. You'll just make fun of me." "You're joking, Weasley," said Malfoy behind them. "You're not telling me someone's asked that to the ball, not that long-moled mudblood." Harry and Ron both whipped around, but Hermione said loudly, waving to somebody over Malfoy's shoulder, "Hello, Professor Moody." Malfoy went pale and jumped backward, looking wildly around for Moody, but he was still up at the staff table, finishing his stew. "Twitchy little ferret, aren't you, Malfoy?" said Hermione scathingly, and she, Harry and Ron went up the marble staircase, laughing heartily. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Hermione Granger. You know who doesn't need saving? You know who doesn't need Ron to step in and do the horrible slug curse thing again? Hermione has got it. Hermione is poised and graceful. She is not disclosing her private life to Ron and Harry because she doesn't feel the need, and she is more than capable of handling Malfoy's insults. I really like the Hermione that we get throughout this chapter, in fact. Though, again, to continue our topic of discussion from last week or possibly even the week before, yes, it is still absolutely true that Hermione is left with a lot of the emotional heavy lifting, right? Hermione is being uncomfortably put in the position of being the emotional fulcrum around which the power trio turn, and that's not a position that suits her, and it is a position that is granted to her only because she's the girl. More on that as we move through. Yeah, good. Yes, Becca Eller pointing out, Hermione owns her space, self-rescuing princess. There it is. There it is. Angela pointing out, though, I love that Ron keeps ambushing Hermione with his constant questioning. I like that, too, very much. I love the idea that he's just, yeah, so who are you going to the ball with? Like, that's pretty good. That's a classic Ron Weasley move there, yeah. Let's move into, I've got to pick up the pace a little bit if we're going to get through all of our many, many slides from this chapter. Spoilers, we almost certainly won't, but let's do our best. This takes place on Christmas morning as Harry and the others are awaking to find Dobby and also presents. "Socks are Dobby's favourite clothes, sir," he said, ripping off his odd ones and pulling on Uncle Vernon's. "I has 7 now, sir, but, sir," he said, his eyes widening, having pulled both socks up to their highest extent so they reached to the bottom of his shorts. "They has made a mistake in the shop, Harry Potter. They has given you 2 the same." "Oh no, Harry, how come you didn't spot that?" said Ron, grinning over from his own bed, which was now strewn with wrapping paper. "Tell you what, Dobby, here you go, take these 2 and you can mix them up properly. And here's your sweater." He threw Dobby a pair of violet socks he had just unwrapped and the hand-knitted sweater Mrs. Weasley had sent. Dobby looked quite overwhelmed. "Sir is very kind," he squeaked, his eyes brimming with tears again, bowing deeply to Ron. "Dobby knew Sir must be a great wizard, for he is Harry Potter's greatest friend, but Dobby did not know that he was also as generous of spirit, as noble, as selfless." "They're only socks," said Ron, who had gone slightly pink around the ears, though he looked rather pleased all the same. "Wow, Harry!" He just opened Harry's present, a Chudley cannon hat. "Cool!" He jammed it onto his head, where it clashed horribly with his hair. The usual celebration of Christmas morning here at Hogwarts for the Gryffindor boys. This is, to circle back around to our opening question from this week's session of Dear Mr. Potter, one of my favorite moments for Ron Weasley. The way that he interacts with Dobby in this book is utterly consistent and utterly delightful, right? For someone who was pushing back so hard against the SPEW all the way through the book, and hey, we're not done with that yet either, Ron's personal connection with Dobby puts to the lie the idea that Ron is in any way invested in extant power structures in the wizarding world or in the domination of this species, this arguably subspecies. We don't really know enough about the house elves to say for sure, but this species of sapient creature, right? Ron has done what characters like Ron, what people like Ron do. He can't appreciate or appraise the plight of the house elves in the abstract, but he can absolutely appreciate the house elves in the present incarnated form of Dobby, right? He can absolutely see that Dobby is different now, and he can respond to that really rather beautifully. And the kindness of giving him the socks, the playfulness with which he teases Harry about giving Dobby 2 of Uncle Vernon's socks, the ugliest socks that Harry owns, the oldest socks that Harry owns that have previously been used to hold up his sneakoscope. The detail here of him giving the socks. I mean, the sweater, okay, we know it's a standing joke now, 4 books in, that Ron doesn't like the sweaters that his mum makes him for Christmas. That's completely fine, right? So giving that away is no great hardship, but it is still a meaningful gift to Dobby, and it's something that Dobby will appreciate. It's really quite lovely. I like this sequence quite a lot. Good. Gift giving is a love language, says Becca. That's lovely. Yes, you're right. C-Star, I wondered when these kids found time alone to buy presents for each other. That is very fair, right? Because the only time that Harry and Ron are separated is when they're not talking, capital N, capital T, and I find it unlikely that Harry is going to order gifts from Hogsmeade or further afield for Ron during that period. But yeah, presumably there are moments, they just agree, right? Okay, Christmas is coming up. Let's take an hour. You do you, I'll do it. It'll be fine, right? We'll just go off and we'll send off our owls for some mail order things. Yes, good. Oh, Lady ZL saying Diagon Alley is a section in the Daily Prophet. Yeah, Amazon drones, says Becca Eller. Good. Excellent. Let me see here. I want to. Yeah, oh, this is interesting. Recyclops saying, Ron is our window into the mind of an ignorant wizard, not actively or innately hateful, just burdened with poor assumptions and bereft of perspective. That's really interesting, Recyclops, because that would imply, I think, that Ron is representative of the wizarding world at large, kind of genial and well-intentioned, but not thoughtful or sophisticated. And that does match the broader structures of the wizarding world, right? That matches our perspective on characters like Cornelius Fudge. It matches our perspective on characters like Percy, honestly, right? The only difference between Percy and Ron, thinking in particular of the way that Ron responds to Victor Crumb, the only difference there is that Percy is into politics while Ron is into sports, and that Percy is smarter and more hardworking than Ron. Well, and even then, not necessarily smarter, certainly harder working, but Ron may grow into that too. It is an interesting idea that Ron is closeted, right? That he has a very limited perspective on a very wide world, which is in interesting tension with Ron's primary role through the first 2 books and even into the third, and goodness knows even into the fourth too, of offering exposition about the wizarding world to Harry, right? Hermione gives the acerbic, logical, practical answer to Harry's question, but Ron will give the context. He will give the shape of the thing, as he will in just a few pages' time when we start talking about giants, right? That's interesting, yes. And also has class implications, says Recyclops. Absolutely, right? Ron as the limited perspective, salt of the earth, poverty-stricken character, right? That he is a lower middle-class wizard, I suppose, is where he's the lowest middle-class wizard, I suppose, is where we can put him here in the Hogwarts schema. Yeah, maybe. The Rahit is saying here too in the chat, I read once that Ron was the series representation of the ability of good people to change their problematic beliefs. Ron has the biases of a typical wizard against house elves, giants, werewolves, but he changes his mind because he is a good person with a good heart. Yes, though I think that is true. I would frame that through that personal connection that seems to inform so many of Ron's adjusted attitudes as we move through the series, right? Was he skeptical of, Muggle-born wizards? Possibly, but then he met Hermione, right? He's never going to go around, casting slurs and aspersions the way that Draco Malfoy is. He has nothing to prove, but it's possible that he didn't really think about Muggle-born wizards like Hermione before he met Hermione, but now with that one-to-one personal connection, he will absolutely defend Hermione. It's possible he didn't ever think about house elves until he met Dobby, and now he has, and he and Dobby are going to get along just fine. He's not necessarily able to extrapolate out that far, but he can extrapolate a little bit, and he is at least open to that personal connection, to the uniquity of that personal connection, but also to a certain degree, the greater, grander context of that personal connection. Yeah, I think that's a good observation. Heroes and Bards says, Ron is just really kind. He's kind without thought and is often embarrassed that being kind is his first instinct, right? You remember him offering to make tea? A great Ron Weasley moment? Yes, absolutely. And yeah, giving it's not just the giving of the socks and the sweater on the slide, it is also the teasing Harry about this, and the taking delight in it, right? Oh no, Harry, how come you didn't spot that? Said Ron, grinning over from his own bed. that's just lovely, right? He's just enjoying this moment very much, and it seems to be sincere. And Ron is absolutely at his best when he is joyous, I think. And joy is going to be pretty thin on the ground for our power trio in the future, and has been, for a couple of books now. And that's going to hit Ron harder than it hits either Harry or Hermione, I would argue. Yeah. Good. Okay. Let's keep moving onward here. Dobby now handed Harry a small package, which turned out to be socks. Dobby is making them himself, sir, the elf said happily. He is buying the wool out of his wages, sir. The left sock was bright red and had a pattern of broomsticks upon it. The right sock was green with a pattern of snitches. They're really... Well, thanks, Dobby, said Harry, and he pulled them on, causing Dobby's eyes to leak with happiness again. Dobby must go now, sir. We is already making Christmas dinner in the kitchens, said Dobby, and he hurried out of the dormitory, waving goodbye to Ron and the others as he passed. Harry's other presents were much more satisfactory than Dobby's odd socks, with the obvious exception of the Dursleys, which consisted of a single tissue, an all-time low. Harry supposed they too were remembering the Tun-Tung Toffee. Hermione had given Harry a book called Quidditch Teams of Britain and Ireland, Ron a bulging bag of dung bombs, Sirius a handy penknife with attachments to unlock any lock and undo any knot, and Hagrid a vast box of sweets, including all Harry's favourites. Bertie Bott's every flavour beans, chocolate frogs, Drooble's best blowing gum, and fizzing Whizbees. There was also, of course, Mrs. Weasley's usual package, including a new sweater, green, with a picture of a dragon on it. Harry supposed Charlie had told her all about the horntail, and a large quantity of homemade mince pies. Let us all take a moment to consider Harry wearing that sweater, walking around Hogwarts. We're going to learn in a page or two's time that Cedric has urged the other Hufflepuff kids to back off. That he's seeing fewer, Cedric Diggory, the real Hogwarts champion badges kicking around the place these days. I'm just trying to imagine the response from the rest of the school if Harry struts out of the Gryffindor common room wearing this vibrant sweater with a picture of a dragon on it. Yeah. I mean, it would be a great moment in a lot of ways. It would be the end of Harry Potter's social life at Hogwarts. I love Molly Weasley with my entire heart. Also, we get a perspective here on the great liberation of those cultures which have been dominated by others, those cultures which have been crushed, those cultures which have been indentured in the service of others, and the great role that they can play in the fantastic, capitalist machine. Dobby has been freed. He's now earning wages, which he uses to buy wool so that he can make his friend a Christmas present. And so the machine keeps turning. And some wool shop somewhere, I'm sure, is very glad of the free Dobby that is now a part of the wizarding world. Okay, let's get right to it. All the preamble is done. What is past is prologue. We've done Christmas morning. We've done all of the awkwardness of asking people out to the date. Let's get to the meat of the awkwardness, shall we? Let's really get ourselves juiced on this adolescent awfulness that's about to unfold, because it is time for the Yule Ball. Enter Hermione Granger. Then Professor McGonagall's voice called, "Champions over here, please!" Parvati readjusted her bangles, beaming. She and Harry said, "See you in a minute," to Ron and Padma, and walked forward, the chattering crowd parting to let them through. Professor McGonagall, who was wearing dress robes of red tartan and had arranged a rather ugly wreath of thistles around the brim of her hat, told them to wait on one side of the doors while everyone else went inside. They were to enter the great hall in procession when the rest of the students had sat down. Fleur Delacour and Roger Davies stationed themselves nearest the doors. Davies looked so stunned by his good fortune in having Fleur for a partner he could hardly take his eyes off her. Cedric and Cho were close to Harry too. He looked away from them so he wouldn't have to talk to them. His eyes fell instead on the girl next to Crumb. His jaw dropped. It was Hermione. But she didn't look like Hermione at all. She had done something with her hair. It was no longer bushy, but sleek and shiny, and twisted up into an elegant knot at the back of her head. She was wearing robes made of a floaty periwinkle blue material, and she was holding herself differently somehow. Or maybe it was merely the absence of the 20 or so books she usually had slung over her back. She was also smiling, rather nervously, it was true, but the reduction in the size of her front teeth was more noticeable than ever. Harry couldn't understand how he hadn't spotted it before. "Hi, Harry," she said. "Hi, Parvati." The transformation of Hermione Granger is a fascinating one, because we get, contained within the span of, I don't know, maybe 10 pages, both kinds, versions of both kinds of transformation that we get in adolescent storytelling. We get the sudden makeup, "Why, Hermione, you've been beautiful all along," revelatory kind of transformation that we see here. "She's done up her hair. She looks amazing," right? That's one kind of transformation that we see in adolescent stories. That's the, she's all that kind of transformation, I suppose. And then we get the other, which is the slower, more simple, albeit in this context, kind of magically enhanced procession from gawky childhood into full-fledged adulthood. The reduction in the size of Hermione's front teeth, right? After she's getting the charm cast upon her, the curse cast upon her by Draco Malfoy undone, and she lets it go a little further to reduce the conspicuous nature of her front teeth. This is a lovely moment of wit and of indulgence and of self-awareness from Hermione, which I absolutely adore and applaud, by the way, right? That's a great moment of empowerment for Hermione. And I love that she is kind of slyly embarrassed, but not in any way ashamed by it, right? She's embarrassed that it has been acknowledged that, yeah, I did this thing, but it's more the commission of the act itself and the way that she did it rather than the doing of the thing itself. She's not embarrassed that she's slightly modified the way she looks so that she feels better about herself. That's a thing that is within the right of every human being, certainly within the right of every teenage girl. So we get this slow maturation toward an adult kind of beauty and also this revelatory, epiphanic transformation into you. It's a really great kind of double-headed approach to everything that is changing. And Hermione is going to continue to be brilliant through the rest of this chapter, I would say. This is great. Oh, let me see here. What I'm seeing some response here in the chat, and I'm not catching the initial thought. I'm so sorry. Oh, no, here's Bart saying, I hate this trope. I hate it so much. Yes, it is awful. Becca pointing out, though, this is the moment most girls wanted to have walking into prom. It is, because it's kind of the moment that most girls are taught that they're going to get walking into prom, right? In real life, we don't get the cheap she's all that revelatory makeover experience. That just doesn't happen in exactly that way. And yet, we've been conditioned by years of pop cultural osmosis that this happens to, I don't know, if not every girl, then at least every other, actually, yes, every other girl, right? Because every other girl has the makeover transformation and every other girl is the best friend of the girl who gets the makeover transformation. We are conditioned to expect, by a decade of John Hughes movies, we are conditioned to expect that this will happen to, as I say, at least half of the girls that you knew in high school, and it doesn't. It doesn't. And even if it did, it would be cheap. It would be meaningless. It's a nothing thing. Hermione has exhibited self-awareness and a willingness to take action. That's what matters. That is what is powerful. And that is absolutely emphasized by the text, right? We note her hair. We note that she is holding herself differently. We note that she is dressed differently. But also, she was also smiling, rather nervously, it was true, but the reduction in the size of her front teeth was more noticeable than ever. Harry couldn't understand how he hadn't spotted it before. Probably because Hermione doesn't smile like that a lot in your company, Harry. This is still true of her. What has been changed about Hermione is something that she chose to change herself. And that is, I think, empowering, right? I would argue that that is empowering and a lovely thing. Yeah, good. Alice been saying, Hermione does a great job at everything she puts her mind to. There's no surprise she would succeed at doing her hair and makeup, etc. Yes, absolutely right. Lindley says, doesn't she say something about her parents wanting her to carry on with her braces? Is that the only time we hear her mention braces? Does she mention braces? I don't think she mentions braces here. She does mention that her parents didn't want her to magically alter her teeth because they are dentists and believe that magic and teeth don't mix, which is a lovely idea. Like, no. Like, you can go to Hogwarts, you can learn to transfigure all kinds of things. And brewing potions, absolutely. But, this is our area of expertise. And let me tell you a thing or two about dentistry, oh daughter of mine. Like, that's quite lovely. I don't think that she mentions in this section that she's wearing braces. To the best of my recollection, Hermione wearing braces is non-canonical, but that may be wrong. By all means, if you can pull a quote. She does mention braces, says and Heroes and Bard saying she definitely mentions braces. Okay, I somehow skimmed over that. I guess the Hermione in my head does not have braces, but okay. All right. Yes. Good. All right. Let's keep pushing on. This is the point at which Harry observes that he has never heard Victor Crumb talk, but now he is talking quite freely and a little nervously, perhaps. Well, we have a castle also, not as big as this, nor as comfortable, I am thinking, he is telling Hermione. We have just 4 floors, and the fires are lit only for magical purposes, but we have grounds larger even than these, though in winter we have very little daylight, so we are not enjoying them. But in summer we are flying every day over the lakes and the mountains. Now, Victor, said Karkaroff with a laugh that didn't reach his cold eyes. Don't go giving everything away now, or your charming friend will know exactly where to find us. Dumbledore smiled, his eyes twinkling. Igor, all this secrecy. One would almost think you didn't want visitors. Well, Dumbledore, said Karkaroff, displaying his yellowing teeth to their fullest extent, we are all protective of our private domains, are we not? Do we not jealously guard the halls of learning that have been entrusted to us? Are we not right to be proud that we alone know our school's secrets and right to protect them? Oh, I would never dream of assuming I knew all of Hogwarts' secrets, Igor, said Dumbledore amicably. Only this morning, for instance, I took a wrong turning on the way to the bathroom and found myself in a beautifully proportioned room I had never seen before, containing a really rather magnificent collection of chamber pots. When I went back to investigate more closely, I discovered that the room had vanished. But I must keep an eye out for it. Possibly it is only accessible at 5:30 in the morning, or it may only appear at the quarter moon. Or when the speaker has an exceptionally full bladder. The counterpoint here between Dumbledore and Karkaroff is beautiful and is deceptively subtle, I think. There's the obvious point of comparison, right? Oh, okay, first off, let's talk about Victor Crumb, I suppose. He's really rather charming when he starts to talk. I really rather like him. I'm somewhat won over by his attributed dialogue here. Not as big as this, nor as comfortable. I'm thinking we have just 4 floors. The fires are only lit for magical purposes. Like, firstly, he's an outdoor kid, but we have grounds larger even than these. Like, he's excited about the outdoors of Durmstrang, the campus of Durmstrang, I suppose, rather than the castle itself. And he is also complimentary about Hogwarts in a way that Fleur has not been up until this point. Then we see too the emphasis of the idea that Durmstrang is somewhere in the far north, though in winter we have very little daylight, so we are not enjoying them. So it's somewhere that's far enough north that there is a significant difference in the amount of daylight in the summer and the winter. That makes a lot of sense. But in summer we're flying every day over the lakes and the mountains. And Karkaroff, now, Victor, said Karkaroff with a laugh that didn't reach his cold eyes. Don't go giving away anything else now, or your charming friend will know exactly where to find us. Dumbledore smiled, his eyes twinkling. Emphasis mine. His eyes are twinkling, while Karkaroff's smile does not reach his. Igor, all the secrecy, one would almost think you didn't want visitors. Then Karkaroff asserts this perspective on rulership, on authority, on dominion, and on domination. We are all protective of our private domains, are we not? Do we not jealously guard the halls of learning that have been entrusted to us? Are we not right to be proud that we alone know our school's secrets and right to protect them? Firstly, it's a school, so privacy is a complicated thing anyway, right? The idea that an academic institution, should be so closed and so guarded is in conflict and in tension with the underlying principle and purpose of a school in the first place. But what Karkaroff is representing here is a perspective on domination. This is my school. It belongs to this, Durmstrang, right? Not Hogwarts, obviously. This is my school. It belongs to me. We are all protective of our private domains. This is mine, with a capital M. Do we not jealously guard the halls of learning that have been entrusted to us? It has been given to me, and I will guard it, not just guard it, but jealously guard it. Are we not right to be proud that we alone know our school's secrets and right to protect them? Should we not ward and guard our schools from incursion, from those who would seek to intrude upon them? But also, isn't it right that we're proud of that? Isn't it right that we have a mastery that extends to the fundamental knowledge of the thing, right? We have, I'm very tempted, obviously, to talk about Saruman, right? I'm very tempted to jump tracks here and start talking about the Lord of the Rings. But he who breaks a thing to understand it has left the path of wisdom, as Gandalf will say of Saruman in the Lord of the Rings. Karkaroff has broken down Durmstrang. He has learned every one of its secrets, and there is in Durmstrang no mystery left. What there is in the place of mystery is mastery. And Dumbledore has, as we might expect, completely the opposite perspective. I would never dream of assuming I know all Hogwarts secrets. Only this morning, for instance, I took a wrong turning on the way to the bathroom and found myself in a beautifully proportioned room I had never seen before. You'll note, not just in a room I'd never seen before, in a beautifully proportioned room. God, the thing about this castle is, it's fantastic. The thing about Hogwarts, I love this place. Have you seen it? It's fantastic. I found myself in a beautifully proportioned room that I'd never seen before, containing a really rather magnificent collection of chamber pots. It was wonderful in the true sense of the word. It was awesome in the true sense of the word. It was magical in the true sense of the word. I have preserved a space for mystery here at Hogwarts, Karkaroff, which is in direct opposition to your dominance of Durmstrang. I kind of wish we'd had the Beauxbaton perspective on this, I have to say. I don't know. I like it very much. And obviously we get the idea that the reinforcement of the idea that Hogwarts, of course, does continue to change too. Yeah, good. Excellent. Oh, yeah, we're getting to the... in fact, that's the very next slide. I just pulled this. This is one of the most striking moments of authorial intrusion that we will get in the entire Harry Potter series. J.K. Rowling included this because people insisted on mispronouncing the name Hermione. And there were, by this point, already early internet arguments about how to pronounce this name. Hermione was now teaching Crumb to say her name properly. He kept calling her Hermione. Hermione, she said slowly and clearly. Hermione. Close enough, she said, catching Harry's eye and grinning. There it is, laid out in black and white. How do you pronounce Hermione's name? You pronounce it Hermione, she said slowly and clearly. I have heard many, many Hermiones. Yes. Hermione is just... I partly because my own name is so unwieldy and unconventional that I don't worry too much about pronunciation, right? I pronounce my own name Alistair. It has been pronounced Alistair, Alasdair, Alasdair. There are numerous close enough pronunciations of my name that I guess from the time that I was, big enough to understand it, old enough to understand it, that it just kind of washed over me. It doesn't really bother me. So I don't mind people mispronouncing Hermione's name at all. It's not the kind of thing that makes me angry or gets me upset or anything. It's just that Hermione is lacking in a rhythmic euphony. It is insufficiently mellifluous for Hermione Granger, right? Her own real name is so good, like the real pronunciation of her name is so good that I do get a little bit upset about corruptions of that. But yes, Hermione Granger, and a whole generation, of course, of Hermione. Oh no, I'm missing the chat. Just scrolled there. Recycle up saying Hermione putting her finger to his lips, saying, "Oh, just don't talk." Yes, he's a big deal. Yeah, good, excellent. All right, guys, I think that's going to do it. We're about to move into. Okay, let's do one more slide, and then we'll move into our beats of character interaction through the last part of this chapter. Since we started talking about Ron, we may as well finish talking about Ron, am I right? Hermione came over and sat down in Parvati's empty chair. She was a bit pink in the face from dancing. "Hi," said Harry. Ron didn't say anything. "It's hot, isn't it?" said Hermione, fanning herself with her hand. "Victor's just gone to get some drinks." Ron gave her a withering look. "Victor," he said. "Hasn't he asked you to call him Vicky yet?" Hermione looked at him in surprise. "What's up with you?" she said. "If you don't know," said Ron scathingly, "I'm not going to tell you." Hermione stared at him and then at Harry, who shrugged. "Ron, what?" "He's from Durmstrang," spat Ron. "He's competing against Harry, against Hogwarts. You're... Ron was obviously casting around for words strong enough to describe Hermione's crime. "Fraternizing with the enemy, that's what you're doing." Hermione's mouth fell open. "Don't be so stupid," she said after a moment. "The enemy? Honestly, who was the one who got all excited when they saw him arrive? Who was the one who wanted his autograph? Who's got a model of him up in their dormitory?" Ron chose to ignore this. "I suppose he's asked you to come with him while you were both in the library?" "Yes, he did," said Hermione, the pink patches on her cheeks glowing more brightly. "So what?" "What happened? Trying to get him to join Spew, were you?" "No, I wasn't. If you really want to know, he said he'd been coming up to the library every day to try to talk to me, but he hadn't been able to pluck up the courage." This is lovely. This is just lovely. I mean, it's not lovely. Ron is the worst. But it's lovely that Hermione is standing her ground. It's lovely that Victor was, as we speculated way back when, coming to the library so that he could be near Hermione. I like that very much. Their whole interaction is good. Hermione is owning her space and absolutely not preempting or even initially acknowledging Ron's, adolescent discomfort, flagrant jealousy, but also general awfulness at this point. Hermione is absolutely where it's at. And there's something so lovely in that. Came over and sat down in Parvati's empty chair. She was a bit pink in the face from dancing. "It's hot, isn't it?" fanning herself with her hand. "Victor's just gone to get some drinks." This is so lovely. How dare you, Ronald Bilius Weasley? How dare you take this moment from her? How often in her life has Hermione been allowed, has embraced and empowered herself to feel this special? How dare you? Let's talk about Ron, I guess. Let's take a look at our poll, actually. Let me cancel this slide. We will finish up, in fact. Okay, business first, then pleasure. I've got a few slides left from this chapter, but we actually made more progress than I was expecting, which is a lovely thing. Let me put up this slide here so you can all see what we're going to be doing next week. Next week, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, chapters 24 and 25, Rita Skeeter's Scoop and the Egg and the Eye. We will absolutely take a look at the very end of chapter 23. I think I've got 3 more slides, maybe 4 more slides from the end of chapter 23. Then we'll delve through chapters 24 and 25. That will take place at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, March 27th, 2018. That is the last session of March. I can't believe we've blown through March already, you guys. I'm very excited to get into the next reading and see what it holds for us. Let's take a look at our poll, shall we? I don't think that I can share this with you guys. No, I definitely can't. But let me tell you, the results are conclusive. In joint last place, we in response to the question, do you, as of Goblet of Fire, like Ron Weasley? In joint last place with 1 vote each. Yes, more than Hermione and Harry. Yes, more than Hermione, but not as much as Harry. Okay, Ron's popularity, a little problematic here. With 2 votes, yes, more than Harry, but not as much as Hermione. Hermione just edging out Harry there just a little bit. In third place, no, I don't, or second place, I suppose, going backwards. No, I don't like Ron at all, with 3 votes. And then with an absolutely definitive, near unanimous 26 votes, almost 80% of the polled participants in the live session here. Yes, but not as much as either Harry or Hermione. So yes, we like Ron, but he is our least favorite of the power trio. That seems to be the consensus, you guys. And I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. Hermione's my clear favorite, and Harry, depending on his behavior, does get down to the Ron level sometimes. Like, he's close, but yes. I think Ron is my least favorite of the power trio, but still a lot to love. Yes, good. Ryan saying these 10 p.m. starts are exhausting. I know they are. I know it is an ongoing problem. There is just never going to be a good time to host these live sessions. Never a good time for everyone. I am trying to continue to move things around, but reliability right now has a premium. So that's what we're trying to do. Okay, let's get into some questions. Oh, interesting. Corporeal says, I'd like Hermione a bit more if she wasn't so hyper-competent the whole time. Makes her a bit unrelatable. I actually think I nominally agree with that assertion. I like Hermione very much in the middle act of Goblet of Fire for exactly that reason, because she is being given this complex adolescent experience and she's allowed to lean into it without it being definitive of her character or undercut by those qualities which are definitive of her character, namely her reliance upon the library and research and study and her lightning fast intellect, right? I like the more complex Hermione that we get in Goblet of Fire quite a lot, actually. Okay, let's keep pushing on here into our questions. Joseph asks, it seems that Ron and Hagrid are the 2 characters that Harry and the narrative seem to most outgrow, more so with Hagrid. Is this connected to their common role in the power trios, their common Hufflepuffness, something else? Absolutely, Joseph. What a staggeringly astute and well-phrased question. I would say that you are completely right. Of course, their role in the power trio and their Hufflepuffness, by the way, are somewhat coexistent. There's a lot of overlap there because their role in the power trio is to be the heart, it is to be the feels, it is to be the badger of this power trio. Yes, I think that is exactly the reason why the narrative leaves Ron behind for exactly that reason. I think that Hagrid is left behind as much as he is for that same reason. Hagrid and Ron also, crucially, are our comic relief characters, right? We generally go to them for comedy, and that simply becomes tonally irresponsible later in the series, right? We're pretty much at the point where we're gonna start to tamp down a lot of the comedy associated with Harry Potter. Certainly by the end of this book, as we transition into the next book, we're going to be dealing with a very different kind of tonal register, and Hagrid and Ron are going to fit most uncomfortably of our primary characters. Of course, we're still going to have Fred and George running around, and we're still going to be leaning on Luna, and you know, there are other characters who are going to occupy that space too, to a certain extent, but Ron is our go-to guy. He's our go-to guy to puncture the mood, and we don't really want the mood puncturing that much as we move through the back half of the series. But yeah, that's a really good observation, and I think you're completely right. The Hagrid problem, we haven't quite hit the Hagrid problem yet, though we're getting close, and we have seen hints of what will become the Hagrid problem already. The way in which Hagrid defaults to a caricature and honestly something of a plot token, the way in which he is reduced in agency and authority, the way in which he is made dependent upon the power trio is very difficult. And I know that there are many readers who who don't love Hagrid in the back half of the series the way that they did in the front half of the series. And honestly, I don't think we're quite there yet. I don't think we have yet crossed that line. I don't think we have yet crossed that Rubicon, but we will, and we're close. And when we get there, we'll be able to say, yes, because remember how we got here? Look back at the path that has led us here. And we've begun that path already, at least. But yes, good question, Joseph. Thank you so much. Oh, interesting. Kate asks, can we make a poll that asks how people feel about Ron and what their Hogwarts house is? I feel like there might be a coloration. Interesting. So your assertion would be, Kate, that Slytherin and Ravenclaw view Ron most poorly. I myself, of course, powerfully self-identify as Ravenclaw, which should come as a surprise to precisely none of you. I am the Hermione Granger of pretty much every social circle in which I find myself, and I'm proud to be so. Is that why I'm less complimentary about Ron? I don't think so, because despite the fact that I self-identify as a Ravenclaw, despite the fact that I lean in a more intellectually biased direction, I do, as I said right back at the beginning, love heart characters generally. Heart characters are some of my favorite characters. You know, I love, Kaylee is my favorite character in Firefly for exactly that reason, right? There are so many great voices which stand in support of loyalty and friendship and community and family that I just adore, that I don't think for me personally that's a signifier. But yeah, you may be able to draw some more sophisticated insight there. Good. Okay. Oh, Brittany Blumenthal saying here in the chat, Hufflepuff, and I have no love for Ron. Hashtag no love for Ron, you guys. That's pretty bad. I'm so sorry for that. Yeah, all right, good. Oh, interesting. Corporeal asking here, is Hermione's hypercompetency and everything a cause/effect of her comparative distance from the narrative? Interesting question. Yes, I suppose it would be. Okay. To distinguish here. No, Hermione is just oftentimes hypercompetent, right? Hypercompetence is one of the starting precepts for Hermione's character, right? Who is Hermione Granger? Well, A, she's amazingly competent at everything. B, if she's not competent in something, she is hardworking and will study to become competent at it, right? That is like the high-profile gloss of Hermione Granger. 3, her hair is unruly, I suppose, is like that's where we'd go down that list. But at the same time, yes, I think that apparent glossy hypercompetence is a product of her distance from the narrative, because we don't get kind of first-person insight into how hard Hermione's life is. Hermione's life, because we are so removed from her, seems to be kind of mechanical, right? Particularly because she so often gets caught up in these subplots which remove her explicitly from the function of the plot. Ron and Harry just hang out all the time, and they share their dormitory, and that's great, and they're just always together. But in the last book, we had the Time Turner plot pulling Hermione out of the action, and she was just gone for extended periods. At the beginning of this book, we have the SPEW plot pulling her out of the main story for extended periods, and she's just gone. That is a problem, because then when she returns, she's coming back with lots of research and you know, assertions to be made and a real kind of sense of propulsive purpose to her. And yeah, I think that can, both internally and externally, both as a character and as a piece of narrative machinery, yeah, I think both of those things conspire to make Hermione feel occasionally too competent, too capable, and too distant from the plot for us to be able to understand or appreciate the nuance of that interaction with the world, right? I do believe that there is an interaction there. One of the things that I like about Hermione is that it's not effortless. Nothing about Hermione is effortless. I love the fact that she is incredibly smart, but she is also incredibly hardworking. She is more dedicated than Harry or Ron or, hey, anyone else in the school, which does earn her a lot of respect, I think, from me personally, because it's one thing to have a character like Hermione who is willing to do the work, and it's another to have the more conventional fantasy version of this, I suppose, is just the savant, right? Normally it would be a wizard. It's just a character who knows everything and can dispense exposition and plot coupons as the story demanded. We never get that from Hermione. She's always there. I always get the sense that she is kind of like the swan, right? She glides back she's like Fleur Delacour on the surface. She glides effortlessly back into the plot with the necessary exposition all bundled up and you know, a box of cookies that she has just baked, like Leslie Knope, right? Just everything is perfect. She's prepared the binder. She's good to go. Actually, Hermione and Leslie Knope share a great deal in common in that regard, right? Leslie Knope, the protagonist of the fantastic sitcom Parks and Rec, they are both brilliant. They are both dedicated. They are both a little emotionally ill-adjusted, but they also work harder than anyone else. And that succeeding by dint of effort is very different, narratively speaking, than succeeding by dint of natural talent or by dint of birth, I would argue. So that's one of the things that makes Hermione work for me. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Corporeal. You guys are so smart. Joseph asking here, is the Yule Ball the apotheosis of the boarding school adventure aspect of Harry Potter? Yes, see my previous comments vis-a-vis exactly that. Yes, I think you're completely right. Good. Yes. Yeah, Joseph confirming in the comment to the question there that I had in fact answered that. This is, oh gosh, it's not our last question. We have lots more questions, but we're going to have to wrap up in just a moment. We're talking about Harry in Book 5. Yes. Ryan defending Book 5 Harry is not the worst. Book 5 Harry is necessary for all future Harrys. Book 5 Harry is also carrying a great weight. Yes, so we'll get to all of that in just a few weeks' time here as we wrap up our discussion. Yeah, good. Leslie Knope is a total Hufflepuff, though, says Alspin. Yes, but also with Ravenclaw tendencies, right? She's a hat stall, definitely. Let's see. Rayla Lynn asking, let's make this our last question. When do you think Ron and Hermione realize their possible feelings for each other? Do you think it's gradual or more sudden? If it's sudden, what moment do you think it is? When Hermione is petrified? The Yule Ball? There's a really interesting beat right at the end of this chapter that unfortunately we're not going to get a chance to talk about until next week. So maybe I should just put a pin in this until then. But okay, let's do this. Right at the end of the Yule Ball chapter, when Harry is distracted by Cedric Diggory on the stairs, who tells him about taking a bath with his golden egg from the last task, and maybe that'll give you a clue. We'll talk about that next week. Anyway, Harry goes up into the common room, which, by the way, he's only been gone for like 20 seconds, but that's time for the fat lady to pass out in her portrait and for Ron and Hermione to launch into a blistering argument with each other. How long was he talking with Cedric Diggory on the stairs? It must have been a while, I guess. It must have been longer than it seems in the attributed dialogue anyway. So he goes in, he hears the last part of that conversation where Hermione is absolutely infuriated with Ron and tells him that he can avoid all of this in the future by asking her first instead of as a last resort. That is, the root of her grievance to the degree that she had a grievance before Ron started behaving like, Ron. And Harry says how glad he is to be talking with Ron again, so he keeps his mouth shut. He doesn't tell Ron what he thinks in that moment. And partly I take that to be, you really shouldn't talk to Hermione that way. What are you doing, right? This is just you being a bad friend, Ron. But it also could be read as a tacit acknowledgement that Harry understands what there is between Ron and Hermione. My read of this is that they know, but they don't know that they know. That there are already those feelings there, but they have not yet become aware of them. When they become aware of them, I really don't know. I do think we get hints of it way back. Not so much book 1, arguably book 2, book 3 even. It's complicated to kind of track it. But yes, we are certainly by now at that point. I guess we'll parse that exchange more carefully because we get Ron and Hermione dialogue that I've already pulled on that slide too. So we will get to that next week, I think, Rayla Lynn. Thank you so much for asking that question. Guys, that is going to do it. This has been an absolute pleasure. Marshall's asking in the chat here, how much does my Patreon pledge need to go up for Alistair to start a Parks and Rec podcast? Here's the thing about a Parks and Rec podcast, you guys. I have thought about this before. I have thought about doing like podcasts on comedy series, although there are 3 comedy series that I would ever do a podcast about. That's almost certainly not true. There are almost certainly way more, but there are 3 comedy series that I can think of doing a podcast about, or that I have seriously thought about doing a podcast about. And those are Cheers, because it was the first and finest example of what would later be codified into modern sitcom structure. It was Frasier, which was the refinement of that into something that is near perfect and comes out of the gate swinging. Frasier is more consistently written than pretty much any TV show you're ever going to see. And that level of consistency is extremely high. And Parks and Rec, which is just a lovely, joyous, celebratory thing. And the problem with all of those is that they descend into just quoting the show. They descend into just either reciting the plots, which for a 22-minute sitcom are pretty mechanical and pretty straightforward and not really possessed of a lot of deeper application or applicability, right? But also when you're talking about the movement of the story itself, it's just quoting jokes, and that's tough. someday I will find a way of talking about Parks and Rec. I absolutely adore it. It is one of my favorite shows of all time and so ambitious, so good, so lovely. I can't believe that I'm talking about Parks and Rec here at the end of a Harry Potter podcast. You guys take me down some weird rabbit holes. Let me tell you, that is going to do it. As I said, we'll be back next Tuesday evening. Excuse me. This is Dear Mr. Potter, not there and back again. Tuesday evening, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central. That's March 27th, 2018 for chapters 24 and 25, Rita Skeeter's Scoop and the Egg and the Eye. Until then, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for joining me. I will talk to you soon. Until then, mischief managed. Good night all.